Welcome everybody to Radicalized, where truth survives and we always have your back. Happy 2023. We're super stoked that you guys have followed us this far. Of course, I'm Heidi Cuda. I'm here with Jim Stewartson and High Fidelity. True warriors against cognitive warfare, which is something we're going to be talking about. I don't want to waste a precious second, gentlemen, because we have an incredible long form interview with Wes Clark Jr. He is the very brave subject of the podcast American Psyop, which our friends will recognize from a few episodes ago when Jack A. Bryan, the director and editor of American Psyop, was on the show. We have the man himself, Wes Clark Jr., and we're just super, super excited to get to that. So anything you want to say before we jump into Front Loaded, guys?
No,
Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it.
Front Loaded.
Okay, so just a couple of high concept framers for you guys. Today, Sunday is when we record, and while the New York Times is reporting but his documents, Byline Supplement gave me a forum to report on global chaos and destabilization efforts caused by Russia. Thank you, gentlemen, for your help with this very important report. The whole point of this is to make liberal democracies look ungovernable. And while doing this report, I was studying what was happening in Italy, and I read an important paper by an Italian academic who explained that cognitive warfare means that the human mind is the battlefield. And I don't know about you guys, but that kind of framing is what helps me up my game and how to report on this stuff. If we are willing to believe that the human mind is the battlefield, that can help us, I think, get some defenses against this type of warfare. Any comments?
Well, I mean, we got to declare it first. We got to understand what it is and get people to know that it's their literal brain that is the battlefield, right?
That's right. That's right.
And that means you have to have defense. You have at a minimum, right?
Yeah.
I think the work that Jack and especially Wes being brave enough to come through with this story is going to help open a lot of eyes.
I think so too. Hi-Fi.
It's very difficult to explain to people that, I think Lee Atwater said it best. Perception is reality, right? And what we are facing is a warping of reality by forces that do not have our best interests in mind in any way, shape, or form.
Brilliant. Absolutely. It's funny that you should quote him. Wasn't he part of the torturers lobby?
Yeah, I don't like him, but
it's so
wrong.
True. It's so true. Absolutely. Give credit where credit is due. Okay. Thank you so much for that. So next up, thanks to Kira Giles, who led me to the reporting of Michael D. Weiss. I learned about one of the most deadly double agents in American history, and guess who took him down? Two women, two CIA officers who were paying attention. So I think it's very important that we note those types of historic narratives. So thank you, everybody who is subscribing to my Substack and supporting me. And there is a banging little story that I wrote about my first book with Ice-T that I want to draw people's attention to, because it was nice to actually take some time to reflect on that. Two more things that I want to bring to your attention. Ruth Ben-Ghiat noted that Bolsonaro's kids are trying to get citizenship in Italy. That's something I included in that Byline Supplement report. But I think what's really cool is that she calls this fascists on the run. So when you see this type of, stage stuff where you got the smiles and here we are, recognize it for what it is. I love what she writes. Oh, look, Bolsonaro's kids are trying to get Italian citizenship. Family is of Italian origin and JB already honorary citizen. Italy with a neo-fascist PM, perfect for fascists on the run. I just think that, again, when we talk about high concept framing, that is what I'm talking about. Lastly, thanks to something.
Hold on.
Sure.
It's just fascists on the run is just it's so very Paul McCartney and Wings.
I know. I thought that too.
Fascist on the run.
Yeah. And
I think that should be somebody should do that. That should be a big hit for 2023, I think.
Yeah, let's hope so. Let's hope so. I think that's really great. That's exactly how I heard it too. I heard it musically. The other thing is, thanks to a conversation that I had with Jim, if we are willing to believe, and I do, that the human mind is the battlefield of cognitive warfare, and we help spread that information to our friends and to our neighbors, then I believe that the people who are going to start suffering the most, and I believe they probably already are the perpetrators who are trying to harm the minds of millions of essentially innocent people who are unprotected. That gave me some comfort today. Wes, in our interview, reminds us that the good guys don't always win, which means we all better get our shit together and start fighting this type of evil. So that's front loaded. All right. So let's just move right along to
Boomer.
Word phrase of the week.
Word phrase of the week.
Nice.
Word phrase of the week this week. Maskirovka. And literally translated from the Russian, it means masking, mask, right? However, it became a Russian military term that was adopted for camouflage. And now it is used to describe the smoke and mirrors, the obfuscation, the dust in the air, where one cannot truly tell what is actually occurring on the field of battle.
Yeah. And as we know, that field of battle can look like a lot of different fields. It can be the human mind. It can be, chaos events. Yes, Jim.
I was just going to say, I think Wes Clark has a lot of experience with Maskarova.
He sure does.
Yes, he does.
I mean, basically, American Psyop is about, Maskarova and from another perspective.
Yeah.
It's interesting that the people who are involved in this Maskirovka that are identified in American Psyop are attached to so many other kind of Maskirovka events. Occupy, right? The Seth Rich whole conspiracy craziness, QAnon. If you see a repeated Maskirovka, is it still a Maskirovka? I don't know.
I mean, WikiLeaks, right? Fucking
WikiLeaks.
I mean, that.
How about this? Iran-Contra.
Right, exactly.
9/11.
Although that was coming from inside the house.
Yeah.
From my favorite of Putin's generals, Mike Flynn's BFF Jack Sinwop ran Iran-Contra.
Yeah. And I would also remind our viewers that Ollie North, who was one of the primary characters of Iran-Contra, was running the NRA.
Right.
Yeah.
Very important. And then got a gig on Fox, which is probably where Mike Flynn is headed, unless the DOJ
Arrest
Mike Flynn.
Yes. Jim, you're supposed to chime in.
No, you have to understand, I enjoy it more than anything when other people say it.
Yeah.
I've said it so fucking much.
That's Jim's little op.
I love it. I love it. But why word phrase of the week is important and why we've been using more and more Russian terms. Again, this is coming from their own playbooks. And the more we know, the more we can break through the mass denialism that's been occurring in America due to what Jim brought up last week with Keir Giles, the author of Russia's War on Everybody. Is Jim brought up a great point about how the Russia was actually quite brilliant propaganda. That is part of the minimizing, that is part of the parasitizing of Soviet era techniques.
I would remind everyone that the proper response to Russia is yes, yes, yes.
Or read Keir's book.
That too.
Yeah. All right.
Or
right
Craig Unger's book. Or
Ruth
watch his
Bengiat's
movies.
book. John Sweeney's book. Paul Mason's book. Man, we've had some incredible talent. Or watch the Volodymyr Demchenko episode. You know, it's all fantastic. Or that one with the president, former president of Estonia. You know, it's all there, guys. All right, we'll keep doing the work. So what's next? Why It Matters?
Why It Matters.
Why does it matter? Why does it matter? By High Fidelity.
Why does it matter? First story this week, we're going to talk about, hey, thanks for listening, Joe. And this comes from an editorial opinion, op-ed from President Joe Biden.
Right.
Yeah, it's really nice to see Democrats and Republicans agreeing on something. And that something is big tech is basically off the chain. They're allowing child sexual abuse material. They are allowing harms to be done to people online. They are allowing foreign actors and conspiracy theories to spread. And Joe pretty well lays it out. And I'd just like to say thank you, Mr. President, for paying attention.
Yes.
Yeah, I was alerted to that this morning, and I'm like, holy shit. I mean, the only thing I would rather would be he named some fucking names, make it super clear that he's talking about Elon Musk, for example. Although I will note that Elmo has chilled of late. I don't know. It seems like the level of his propaganda and the stock price of Tesla are inversely correlated. I'm just.
Well, I actually think that's a little bit terrifying, because when you talk about the normalization and the short-term memory span people have, it's like what the stunt that you described on our live stream on Thursday that Mike Flynn is pulling. It's like they can just all of a sudden become Joe Normal and just imagine this isn't happening. Well, no, we're not memory holing any of it. Thank you, Ruth Ben-Ghiat, for giving us the words and the tools to know how we need to stay focused and sharp.
Next story this week. Knock, knock. Who's there? You. And why do I call it that? Because Microsoft has released a new AI that can simulate anyone's voice with 3 seconds of audio. And here's the best part, not just simulate it, but also maintain their same emotional state while they're speaking, which is interesting, because one of the problems previously with computer-generated voices were that they tended to be flat and so did not sound human to the human ear. Jim, you've got a lot of experience with this. I think this is terrifying and cool.
Like most technology.
Right. Like all technology. And I mean, speaking of which, right, Joe Biden talking about social media is what we're worried about with all this AI shit, right? How are people going to come in and weaponize it? By big tech, quote unquote, he means the billionaires and the people behind them that are using these things, that are weaponizing these platforms to fuck people's minds, right? Which is, again, exactly what the theme of this show seems to be, is to use social media in the way that people used to use, pamphlets or kidnapping or whatever, to insulate people's information space.
God, do we have a great quote coming up from Wes? Should we tease it?
Nah, let's
I gotta watch the whole thing.
Oh man, it's so great. Wow. As soon as he said that, I was like, oh, so keep watching, guys. All right, let's go.
I will, hold on, before we go ahead, I would like to say this. One of the things that Alex Winter told us is that there is no legislative movement in Washington due to the lobbying of these companies. We talked to Jackie Singh about this, how there are entire rooms of data scientists and psychologists and designed to do nothing but manipulate you and manipulate your perception of reality. And again, we go back to Lee Atwater, perception is reality.
Yeah.
These are things that are being used against people, and sometimes in very, very malignant ways. And with AI on the, on the cusp of like serious breakthroughs here, we need to have legislation that properly addresses these issues. And my suggestion would be that any product that is from AI has to be watermarked as being a product of AI, or else you're going to face serious financial and legal repercussions.
I love when Hi-Fi does these, like, when he sends these messages out, because they get heard. They get heard. The time that you said people who are on platforms who are actually getting paid, there needs to be, just like with advertising, a note, this is a paid account that's putting out this, bullshittery. That's something that's being talked about. So go Hi-Fi. Go Hi-Fi. Go Hi-Fi.
And on that note, speaking of messages I'd like to put out, here's one for you. Peter Thiel's Double Trouble. What am I talking about? Well, Peter Thiel's got a lot of trouble coming his way. Specifically.
Trigger warning.
Specifically, the Winklevoss twins charged in the United States over crypto sales.
Sorry, you just got to pause. Yeah, I mean, first of all, Winklevoss is just funny, and second of all, it feels like 18 years ago.
I know. I feel like I just went back into like a time machine,
Can I offer?
Back when some of these guys were thought of as cool and not trolls and trying
Can I offer a theory? And again, this is just me kind of off the cuff here. I would argue that the whole lawsuit between the Winklevoss twins and Peter Thiel and Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg and all that may have been Maskarovka.
Oh, it could have been anything. Whatever.
Oh,
it could
God
have been
knows.
anything. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's so far in the past. But in the present, they had a little dust up. So they run a company called Gemini, and there's also a company called Genesis. And Genesis is owned by a different company, and the Winklevoss
called Gemini. Is the third company called Geminis?
When you said Gemini, I thought it was Gemini.
No, actually, it's called, as you can, the third company is called the Digital Currency Group, which so far has not commented.
Oh, but, I love that. That's to me, I hear Digital Currency Group, and I'm sorry, but you know what I hear? Moscow on the Hudson. They have the names for so many of the offshoring organizations and companies are always like a new firm, big corporation. They're as generic as possible.
Yeah. Well, this is important because I would remind all of our viewers that Peter Thiel and the Winklevoss twins are investors together in a company called BlockFi that engages in online transactions in currency. And also the Winklevoss twins and Peter Thiel both decided to chip in to Blake Masters' campaign in Arizona. Again, when I troubleshoot servers, I look for blinking lights, and there's 3 of them for you.
I love it.
I don't know what to say, man. Fucking Peter, like Winklevoss, just for God's sake, just go away. Stop, like, fucking with everybody. Just stop.
I'm going to guess that when you take the money from the oligarchs, domestic and foreign, that tentacles are attached and they can't just go away, which is why you end up with something like cryptocurrency.
Because, well, I mean, it's why the Winklevoss brothers, who, were part of Zuck's, like, Hot or Not clone in fucking 2004 or whatever, why they're into other scams, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, fucking criminals, like, they see these lanes, right, where they can skirt, you know, the law. And crypto was the perfect avenue, and it was created by guess who? Peter Thiel and fucking Elon Musk.
Well, that was very refreshing.
So refreshing.
Actually, you know what it put me in the mind of? Hellscape.
Jim Stewartson's Hellscape. Oh, fuck.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this edition of Hellscape, which, as usual, is coming right off the top of my head, so you'll have to forgive me. But I do have some things to say that have been brewing for a little bit. First of all, I am back on Twitter since our last episode. I am extremely torn about it because I think it is, as my dear friend Hi-Fi says, a $44 billion psyops cannon. And I don't like participating in that. However, it does give me a, you know, it adds several zeros to the number of people that I can reach because I built a big voice, you know, before I was banned. So, you know, it's a mixed bag. And it's especially mixed because, as anyone who's been following me for a while knows, you know, it's also a torture chamber, especially for people like me who are going up against powerful people. And so, you know, within a couple of days, the literal hate cult that has been chasing me around for 2 fucking years got started up again. Well, I mean, it's not like it went anywhere, but, you know, it is back in action. And I'm just going to talk about this fucking guy for a minute because he's leading the charge. What's important to know about Fred Brennan is that he has been tormenting people for a decade. That's all he has ever been and all he will ever be. So if you're listening to Fred Brennan, the guy who created 8chan, the guy who wrote an article in the Daily Stormer to bring more Nazis to 8chan, the guy who ran Gamergate as a cult leader, according to himself, you know, if you're listening to this guy, you should seriously reconsider your life choices because you're listening to someone who hurts people for a living. And, you know, here he is with 50 of my dedicated trolls, literally trying to psyop them into hating me. So, you know, I don't like giving attention to people like this, but this is a person who is largely responsible for the entire alt-right because it came directly from Gamergate. So with that, the reason why I bring this up is because the thing that the sociopath is angry about is that I am now getting the message out to a lot more people. And where my 391,000 people have seen this thread about Mike Flynn. And the fact that, you know, we have the likes of people like Fred Brennan coming after me and his crew of psychotic trolls tells me that they are really, really nervous about what I'm telling people, especially about this. It was really interesting and hard to listen to a bunch of people making up shit about me, you know, professional Gamergate trolls. On the other hand, they showed their hand. Fred is really upset that I'm talking about Mike Flynn. Fred is really upset that I'm talking about Russia. Well, I'm sorry, Fred, but all you're doing is telling on yourself. So I'm going to briefly go through this thread, just top level. I'm not going to dig into all the details, but Fred, fuck you. This is the message. Mike Flynn is responsible for more treason and harm than anyone who claims to be an American patriot in history. And I'm going to explain why. Flynn sourced an entire handbook on how to radicalize people with psyops to topple democracies. He did that in 2012 with contributors like Seb Gorka, for example. Mike was director of the DIA until 2014, and he tells the story that that's because he had a policy disagreement with Obama, which is complete bullshit. What happened was that Mike Flynn went to GRU headquarters at exactly the same time that Edward Snowden stole critical military secrets from Flynn's DIA servers. So, come on. Why are we arguing about whether this guy is a traitor or not? In early 2014, Mike Flynn allowed Vladimir Putin to capture Crimea. Plain and simple. A few months after he was at GRU headquarters, the same month that the head of the GRU was supposed to come visit Mike Flynn in the United States, Vladimir Putin took Crimea with Spetsnaz soldiers. I won't go through this entire timeline, but anyone who looks at this, who looks at all of these events together, and please check out my thread on Twitter, cannot tell me that Mike Flynn was fired because he disagreed with ISIS. And not to put too fine a point on it, but a year later, this is where Mike Flynn was. I'm not going to dig into MAGA 3X and all of the blatant evidence of Mike Flynn planning to create a psyop shop called MAGA 3X with Peter Thiel and a whole shitload of white supremacists. It's right here, conveniently right on Twitter. Here's Mike Flynn 11 days before the election calling out to MAGA 3X, which ran Pizzagate and a whole bunch of other ops that illegally stole the election. Here's Flynn doing Pizzagate. This is Pizzagate. This is Mike Flynn's live fucking tweet right here. November 4th, 2016, before the election, Spirit Cooking came right out of the WikiLeaks drop that was acquired from Guccifer. Speaking of WikiLeaks, Julian Assange was targeted by Palantir in 2011, and we're going to talk about that a little bit in the interview coming up. This fucking guy, this Holocaust denier, who's here with Dana Rohrabacher, who was named by Kevin McCarthy as one of the people Putin pays. Here they are. Here he is doing the white power symbol in front of the Ecuadorian embassy. As you know, this came right out of WikiLeaks. You see Spirit Cooking here. It's all the same op. It was all Mike Flynn and his allies stealing the election. Speaking of which, I explained it in 2 minutes. I'm not going to go through it on this broadcast, but Mike Flynn paid an ex-FBI agent named Brian McCauley 28 grand with Turkish money to help reopen the Hillary Clinton emails, which by almost any measure cost her the presidency. Here's Mike Flynn's son wearing MAGA 3X gear. Mike Flynn put all of his operatives inside the National Security Council while he was in the National Security Advisor role for 2.5 Scaramucci's, including this guy, Rich Higgins, who did the cultural Marxism memo that got him and other people fired. Here he is with Ginny Thomas, who helped Flynn plan the fucking insurrection. Here's Mike Flynn right after the 2016 election, talking about irregular warfare at its finest, talking about the 2016 election, talking about an army of digital soldiers, which became the catchphrase of QAnon victims. Numerous insurrectionists literally said, I was a digital soldier in the army. That's what I thought. He invented it. He trademarked it. Mike Flynn raised millions of dollars from where to get himself out of his DOJ bind? From QAnon. He started his defense fund the month before Q started. Why did he do that? And why did he start Q? Because the DOJ shut him the fuck up. So he needed a lark. He needed an outlet that was concealed because he didn't have the right to speak because he had pled guilty to lying about his communications with the fucking Russian government. On October 28th, 2017, fucking Q started. Guess who it was? It was MAGA 3X. It was the same group who stole the 2016 election. This time it was James Brower, a MAGA 3X guy from Flynn's home state of Rhode Island, and Trump's Twitter whisperer, Justin McConney, who called himself Microchip and ran around Twitter for years doing racist, harmful operations against American citizens. Q was just Mike Flynn's alter ego. I have gone through this line by line. If you want to see how it lines up, all of his friends, all of his enemies, every single fucking thing is the same. It was Mike Flynn's voice because he couldn't talk because he's a criminal. Here's Tracy Beans, who's Mike Flynn's employee, who here screams out to Donald Trump, "We are Q. We planned the whole thing." She blocked me while I was doing this thread. It was pretty awesome. Here's Mike Flynn's brother on a QAnon show raising money for the defense fund. Literally, there's a fucking Q drop right there in the corner. That's Joe Flynn, my BFF, who has sent me about 100 offensive emails. Then Mike Flynn hired Sidney Powell. And in 2019, 8chan, speaking of Fred Brennan, 8chan got shut down because multiple white supremacist mass murders were broadcast on it. Fred, as soon as that happened, he had a big change of heart all of a sudden. Bullshit. He's covering up his own responsibility for all of this. Here's Jim Watkins, who got hauled into Congress to explain himself. Why are there mass murderers on your website? The only person who would talk to him is MAGA 3X member Jack Posobiec. Roger Stone got off his DOJ bind in February 2020, and a few months later, Bill Barr's DOJ dropped the charges on Mike Flynn. A couple months after that, what happened? Mike Flynn and his family did the United States oath that's taken by military and government officials, except he added what? Where we go one, we go all to the end. What's that? The QAnon slogan. It is the QAnon oath. He had take the oath in his fucking Twitter profile until he just took it off. The oath he's talking about is to Q, to him, not to the United States of America, not to the Constitution. Look, I'm gonna go ahead and shut this thread here because I want to get to Wes Clark. But the record is clear. What happened is clear. Who's responsible for this is clear. The foreign nation states that are funding and fomenting it are clear. The people who are coming after me personally, who are calling me crazy and Blue Anon and whatever, people like Fred Brennan, bring it the fuck on, guys. You have no argument. All you can do is call me crazy for pointing out facts. The insurrection was planned by the same people who executed QAnon, who stole the 2016 election. It's not actually that complicated at all. They want you to think it is. They want you to think it's some kind of mystery what happened. There's no mystery anymore. The facts are plain. It's in the open. Mike Flynn and his allies are traitors to the United States of America. And anyone who defends them, anyone who gatekeeps for them, is on that team. That team is not America, and it's not democracy. Arrest Mike Flynn.
One of the most important podcasts of this moment in time, not just Radicalized, one of the most important podcasts is American Psyop. It is actually revealing just how these psychological operations work. And this time, as we've said, we've got Wes Clark Jr., the son of Wesley Clark, former head of NATO, who is going to tell us exactly what he went through, what we should all know, and a hell of a lot more. He sort of is my kind of candle in the wind for the times that we're living in. He's also just one hell of a cool human being. Let's go ahead and see a clip of his show.
There's this big monster moving around. I can catch maybe little glimpses of it, but I don't know what it is.
This is Wes. His life is something of a mystery even to himself.
My name is Wesley Clark Jr. My father, General Wesley Clark, ran for president. That's when life started to get weird.
There are two things Wes knows for sure. One is that he's been the target of multiple intelligence operations and assassination attempts.
He says, there's a team coming up to kill you, and you need to evacuate the Balkan Peninsula immediately.
The other thing Wes knows is that at one point in his life, he was completely insane.
I had this huge bowl of ice cubes in front of me that I was eating like popcorn, telling him I'm one of the two witnesses to the end of time, and I announced the apocalypse on your show tonight.
He's just not completely sure where the operations ended and the insanity began.
I'm going nuts and being swarmed by a cult. And they tell you, you have a very powerful spirit inside of you. And I was like, give me more of that crazy. That crazy's good.
Join me, Emily Bix, for a series of interviews where Wes and I separate fact from paranoia, and we'll try to make sense of his messy life.
And I'm leading 4,000 veterans in a blizzard to take down an oil company protected by multiple mercenary organizations. He goes, don't call her Mrs. Epstein. Her name's Ghislaine Maxwell. Oh, they want to meet you. He said, hey, laundered money in Trump's 2016 campaign using virtual credit cards.
This is American Psyop.
Even today, sitting down here with you, there's part of me that goes, is this an op? Am I being set up?
Oh man, I guess we'll work through that.
We just saw the trailer to American Psyop. We all binged it. It was just so important. I literally was setting timers to when it was coming out. Wes Clark Jr., thank you so much for joining us on this show. just full disclosure, we have all become friends in this fight, and you feel like family, man. Thank you so much for being here. Wes, can you tell our viewers just some of the key things that they should know before they listen to American Psyop, for those who have not heard Jack A. Bryan, Marley, and Emily's podcast about the active measures that were run on your life?
Sure. I mean, first is, did I suffer a mental breakdown through those 9 episodes? Yeah. But I saw and heard things that were actually happening that I remembered at the time, that I remembered later. And everything that's talked about, every person that's mentioned, there's corroborating evidence, there's emails, there's signal chats, there's Twitter DMs, there's historical record, like literally everything I'm describing happened.
Yeah, it's very important. And also between the gentleman and myself on this show, so many of the names have come up in our story. So as I was listening, jaw dropped, the corroborating evidence also, wove into that sort of concentric circle in our story. So that was really very important, I'd say, for us as well. But let's just tell our viewers why somebody like you would be enticing and attract active measures. Your father, retired general, ran for president, but I think the most critical thing in my mind is that he headed up NATO. And as we know, Putin has been trying to take out NATO, ever since, the dawn of his reign. And I think that's a very critical component. So as you reflect back on the things that happened to you, which we'll talk about, can you kind of confirm that you think that's maybe why you were enticing to?
Oh yeah, no, for sure. It was all because he had been head of NATO. It wasn't so much that he ran for president, but it was also the possibility that they thought he could be in a Clinton administration as some kind of cabinet level thing, and then they could have influence.
Right. Guys, I can keep going, but do you want to jump in? I have one more thing I'd like to say before I turn over the reins to you, or just go ahead and interrupt me.
Go ahead.
I just want to give a shout out. When we had Jack Bryan, who directed and edited American Psyop, the podcast we're referring to, I was able to tell him that your father was very, very pivotal in my preparation for this war, because he gave a lecture at the Milken Institute in 2014, which I attended. And his thesis was that we have to stop lurching from crises to crises and see what the bigger picture is. And I just zoomed the hell out and dropped a bombshell story with the help of these guys this morning, which we'll probably talk a little bit about. But what he did was he was the first person to frame and mention cyber warfare and what it would look like. And I didn't quite understand it at the time. And it would be less than 4 years later that I would be the subject of those types of active measures. So it's interesting to me that your father warned you in 2016 when Trump was installed that America was going to become like Russia, and to keep your head down, get a job, take care of your family. And you heard the words, but you didn't really hear what he was saying.
No, I heard the words and I heard what he was saying. I just thought freedom and democracy were more important than whatever may happen to me.
Wow.
And we'd seen this play out, in the 90s and the aughts in Eastern Europe, Hungary, Bulgaria, other places. What happens is the intelligence services, to a large extent, post-Warsaw Pact, post-Soviet, a lot of them got involved in organized crime.
Yeah.
And then when they're allied with, gangster politicians, they come in and they'd be like, hey, I see you own these 10 gas stations. Well, I'm going to file some paperwork, and now I own the 10 gas stations.
Wow.
And because we're in charge of the Ministry of Justice, they're mine.
Wow.
I mean, that's kind of what happened in a lot of parts of Eastern Europe in the late 90s and early aughts with organized crime and how it touches intelligence services.
Oh my God, we just had Jason Stanley on, the amazing professor from Yale, who warned us that fascism only succeeds because big business buys in, and they buy in for what you just, for the things that you delineated, without realizing that fascism's not good for them. Fascism's not good for them either, Because if they, you know, the leader wants your business or his cronies wants your business, it's theirs. Guys, go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you because you know, we were talking a little bit offline, and we met 2.5 years ago. You know, right when I first started looking into QAnon and all of that, and a version of, you know, what happened to you has been happening to me over the last 2 years, and I just wanted to say thank you for telling that story. Not only an American Psyop, which is the most important thing, but telling it to me at the beginning, because it helped me really understand how sophisticated these things are, how harmful they are, and you know, why everyone needs to be careful and understand that this kind of thing really does happen, right? And that I think is the thing about American Psyop that is the most important thing I can imagine, which is showing human beings you can be targeted, and when you are, it can change everything about your reality, right? And I just, you know, sorry, I don't know if that's a question exactly,
That's
but
an expression of gratitude.
Thank you for helping me and everyone else understand.
No, it messes up your perspective, not only in the immediate after effect of it happening, but like for years. I mean, you know, I reached out to you, Jim, again, probably a month or two before we started recording this podcast in the summer of 2021. I remember I called you up and we walked around the neighborhood when I'd heard about Desiree Kane, and I'm like, oh man, Desiree Kane's out to get me. And you're like, no, dude, she's been working with Dave Troy doing research for like a year or so. But also, you know, it makes you worried about telling what happened. You're like, will I get targeted again? Will, you know, X, Y, and Z happen? Will I sound crazy?
Yeah. And that's the most important point, right? And it's the thing that is the most common tactic. You're crazy, right? Like you're you know, the thing they used against me was unwell for years, right? And so what they do is very pernicious. They literally make you crazy because they attack you from all sides, and then they call you crazy.
No, they're just totally gaslighting you, and you know, they render people ineffective that way. I mean, there's a whole lot of different methods to do it. That's just one that you want to use for people that aren't easily bought or, you know, compromised.
Yeah, I mean, in a weird way, it's a badge of honor when you become like in the crosshairs of this, because it's a sign you're doing good work and that you have that kind of integrity. But it does try to warp your reality. And I have been studying the piece that I wrote that dropped today. I had been researching global chaos events and linked to Russian active measures. And as I was researching Italy, I read a brilliant report that basically explained cognitive warfare is the human mind as the battlefield. And that really is helping me, because with that kind of framework, knowing that it's our minds and our psyches that they're targeting, I feel like that gives me a bit more armor. And as I said earlier to the guys, to me, once we get past the denial of that being the war that we are ensnared in, I believe that the biggest casualties are going to become the perpetrators. That's my goal. And maybe that's optimistic, but man, that feels like a worthy goal.
Well, the good guys don't always win in history. So it's important to understand that and react accordingly, which is the good guys only win if you get involved with the good guys.
Oh my God.
when we talk about all this stuff, you know, when you're talking about cognitive warfare and other things, a lot of it is because an actual war between great powers is suicide. So you've got the only way you can really take down the United States is kind of the only way the colonial powers were able to take down 19th century China, which is you come into a situation that's chaotic and you make it worse, and then you get everybody to squabble amongst each other. I mean, for me, you know, I know, Jim, I talked about this with you in 2020. To me, it's what we're looking at as a kind of 21st century colonialism, where they're trying to reproduce the Taiping Rebellion in the United States. Now, because most Americans aren't familiar with Asian history, they may not know what the Taiping Rebellion was, but it was right after the Opium Wars in China. And this dude who was hopped up on pamphlets from American missionaries who lived in, you know, the Yangtze Valley in the heartland where all the food was grown was like, dude, I'm Jesus Christ's little brother, and we need to kill everybody who's not on our side. And they rebelled against the empire. Like somewhere between 40 and 100 million people died. And if you look at the kind of precursors to that war, it was high rents, ethnic tension, a country awash in mercenaries, a country awash in opiates, and local and national officials who were on the payroll of colonial powers. So when you zoom out and you look at the United States, you know, 2010 and onward, we fit the bill.
Yeah. And when you said hopped up on pamphlets, that's maybe my favorite.
That's brilliant. Brilliant.
Pamphlets matter.
That's important. That's a psyop, right?
Oh yeah, no. Let me tell you about a really interesting thing. One of the first kind of weird things that happened to me, and I wasn't targeted specifically in this. It was kind of a mass thing. I was driving cross country in '99 and pulled into some rest station in West Virginia, and there's like a VHS tape on the sink, like handwritten. It's like end time and with a note on it that was like, dear friend, if you found this, I've gone to the other side. And I was like, I'm a writer and I'm going to take that and I need to see what's on that. And I bring it out to the car and this pamphlet falls out of it. And it was like super rapture, old school kind of, you know, white supremacist stuff. And my first thought was, dude, I hope this doesn't have anthrax on it. When I got back to LA, I watched it, and it was this movie called End Time that the dude who wrote the Turner Diaries, like, he's in it. Like they have this kind of you know, a break in the middle of the movie where the dude comes out wearing bib overalls in a chicken coop and starts talking like about antediluvian time and mud people and just crazy stuff. But when you watch this movie, it kind of answers a lot of the cognitive stuff that we're up against. Like the main characters, they have a calculator and they can't quite figure out numbers. Like there's some connection between numbers, but it's like, dude, it's calculator. Like you don't know math, you know, and then you see the amount of money they spent on the movie, which was, you know, they jump a car through a house and there's a helicopter and, you know, there's a couple $100,000 in production value. But to me, it was the marketing of it that was ingenious, which is putting VHS tapes all over the country that people will find and think, is this like somebody's final will and testament? Is it a suicide? Is it like, what's the mystery?
That sounds like one of Jim's fucking ARGs is what that sounds.
No, totally. That's what I was just about to say.
It was exactly what he did.
It was from a church in St. Petersburg, Florida.
St. Petersburg.
Yeah, no, for sure.
No. There's St. Petersburg and the St. Petersburg. There's some weird connections there.
The images within it were all very kind of, you know, Russian Orthodox type, harsh, stern God who's going to
QAnon-y.
Yeah.
Well,
wow.
I mean, but what you're saying is so important, especially, I mean, David Lane is, I think, who you're talking about, who was in it, right? Who wrote the 14 words, which is, you know, has been used by neo-Nazis for decades, right? Yeah. So the fact that these Nazis, you know, for decades have been doing exactly the same thing using very similar techniques. You know, people need to understand that what you're talking about, that rabbit hole, that, ooh, what's this weird thing, right? Like doing it on VHS tapes is extremely inefficient. It's very clever and will work for a certain number of people, but there's only so many VHS tapes you can put. There are unlimited number of tweets or Telegram channels or whatever the fuck. And I just want our listeners to hear very clearly what Wes is saying, which is that the same techniques from the same type of people are being used all over again.
Yes.
Yeah, they're just infinitely scalable in a way nothing was. It would be like, you know, if Hitler had to personally go to everybody's house and sit in their living room and talk them into it versus going on the radio.
Absolutely.
Or having Lenny Riefenstahl.
So did you ever consider running ops? I mean, at some point you realized, holy shit, I'm being opped. Yes or no?
It took me a really long time to figure that out. Like, and also because it wasn't like one group.
Yeah.
Like, so if you're looking at American Psyop, I mean, I was in kind of a unique situation. It was more like a bunch of overlapping Venn diagrams.
Right.
You know, so there were different intelligence agencies from different countries. There were different cults. There were, you know, and there's overlap between people.
Yeah. That was so incredibly important. Go ahead, Hi-Fi.
So the reason I ask is when they started coming after me, you know, they emailed my employer, they got me fired from a job. I realized I had troll ops coming against me. And I went, yeah, I probably had some sort of weird mental thing going on, but I actually went ops back against them. And do you ever think about that? Do you ever think about going after those people who did that to you?
Not really. The best advice I ever got from anybody, there's a fellow I followed on Twitter named Righteous Coder. You know, his name's Mike. He's a regular guy. And I talked to him after, you know, probably after Josh and Cindy were like, "You are the enemy." And he's like, "Dude, block everybody and stop communicating with people."
Yeah.
And I cannot offer better advice to anybody going through this than and
I know.
pay attention to them.
Well, so
I mean, it's creating an echo chamber for you personally, right?
Yeah.
It's the equivalent of QAnon or any of these cults, but they're poisoning your mind specifically with propaganda designed to change your opinion. And just like all other cults and propaganda, the only way to help is to remove yourself from the thing that's poisoning your mind.
Yeah, you're not going to win. You're not going to change their mind. It's like you're just going to get deeper into it.
And
I would say that I didn't want to change their minds. I wanted to scare them. I wanted them to realize that the operation bullshit that they are pulling is going to lead to death and destruction and bloodshed. And if they think they're going to escape unscathed, that's most likely false.
Well, yeah, nobody is an island in that stuff. And when you talk about running ops, I mean, as it was going on, my brain was kind of functioning on a whole bunch of different levels simultaneously.
Yeah.
So on one level, I'm like, I'm Enoch. And on another level, I'm like, I'm being manipulated by these people who are trying to like do stuff for the Russians or do stuff for Trump.
Yeah.
But what they really don't know is I really am Enoch and they're the ones who are going to get it in the end. You know, so I don't know if that's like running against people, but I was just kind of fumbling and stumbling my way through it as best I could.
Let me just comment real quick, Hi-Fi. I picture the way Hi-Fi attacked it, the way Malcolm Nance went to Ukraine. He just got geared up and he used words as weapons back at them and using the same words that they used to hurt people like Brianna Wu. And that became very clear when we had her on and all of a sudden I understood why Hi-Fi did what he did. the reason I feel a real kinship with you, you know, we're both veteran writers, but also you said something on American Psyop about how you just believed what people told you.
100%.
And
I
I fully get that, because, you know, I think when you have like kind of a compassionate, empathetic heart, and particularly you and your activism wanting to do good, that's why I got involved in it. You know, this has been nothing but destructive in my life, but it's because I believe, like Jim says, we don't want our kids and grandkids to grow up in a hellscape. So we're going to try to do what we can, and each of us in our own ways. But you also just kind of have that sort of like, you know, goodness of heart. And so it's not your get down to be that guy who's going to be, saber rattling necessarily. And I think that's like different approaches. But for me personally, blocking, not engaging, helps my mind focus on the things that I need to focus on. Does it hurt when I read something, even that, you know, Jim wrote, and I assume he probably blocked out my name when I look at it? Fuck yeah, it still does. But thankfully, our good friend, President Jackie Singh, who's an amazing, just a really, really talented woman in this war, she has given me tools to not allow their bullshittery to penetrate my head and heart anymore as much. And I do want to talk about the trauma of all of this as well. But before we do, please give our viewers a snapshot of who you were before this was all happening. The fact that you have a military background, the fact that, you know, you found yourself in Hollywood dealing with a lot of these characters. That is something I very much relate to. The guys know that I, sat across a pitch table from somebody I knew to be a previously incarcerated pimp who got awarded to executive level because he kept quiet when he was incarcerated. So that's a Hollywood story right there.
Yeah, no, a Hollywood thing is, I didn't go to film school and came into it with no family connections or anything else. I'm amazed I was able to make a living at it as long as I could. But, it's a town of make-believe, and it's a town of relationships, and it's, it has more to do with who you're sleeping with and who your friends are and who you've, done bad stuff with in terms of who gets the job. Like, it's not like an objective thing. We're like, oh, so-and-so is a better writer. Like, it's writing. It's not objective. But, who I was before, I was, more or less the same person. I mean, kind of trusting in people and happy-go-lucky and do what I can to help folks. I mean, I was, in the aughts in the late 90s, I was traumatized. Yeah. I had undiagnosed PTSD. So I was tense. I didn't like to go out in public too often.
Mm-hmm. I relate to that. The guys know I have post-traumatic news syndrome from having been a news producer for all those years. Jim?
PTSD is the goal, right? I mean, it's to disable you, as you were saying before. The one thing I want to hear you talk about a little bit is infiltration. Mm-hmm. Yes. And the way that it works, as you were saying before, is both sides, they get both sides radicalized, right? Mm-hmm. Because the point of it is to destroy the movement in general, to discredit it, to discredit its leaders. And they do that by infiltration of the side that you think you're on, right? Heidi says often there are no rear areas in the war. There's a particular thing that data point where they would set up tents, right? Pretend that they were protesters who were, sleeping in these tents, but then they'd go and sleep in a hotel, a casino instead, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's all fake, right? Mm-hmm. I just wanted to hear you talk a little bit about how that works and why it's so dangerous to movements and why people need to pay attention.
Yes. Well, because the agenda of somebody doing that is to destroy the movement. I mean, what people don't get, you know, we live in this crazy upside down world where you've got, you know, look, PR agencies are incredibly powerful. And so people's public perceptions are managed and they're paid for. And you have the public thinking guys like Elon Musk and oil companies are like in it for freedom, or that they somehow deserve the cash they have and other things. And what they do is they're all paying people. They pay people to go in and get into a movement, and they don't even have to do anything that you may notice. It's like if you go back to the old World War II kind of sabotage things, you know, you put a person in there and that person may just be like, nope, we have to go over the plan one more time. Or they spread gossip to get people to fight each other. I mean, look, when you look at, you know, the disorganized resistance to Trumpism and all the after effects as it still goes on, is everybody kind of on the right and the left is pointing fingers at each other and people in their own groups, because they're like, you're an infiltrator, you're working with these guys, you're working with these guys, because it only takes one person being in the group to spread distrust about everybody.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that was a lot of the reason I thought the best defense against all that stuff was do everything in the open. Like, don't do signal chats with people. Don't do like anything you can't put like on the front page of something.
Yeah.
Don't create sock puppet accounts. Don't do things that will break down people's faith in you.
Yeah.
And you know, talk to people when you hear things, but you can't, I mean, you can't fully defend against these things because it's very cheap to do. It's not like they're taking like, all right, it's going to cost us $200,000 to get FBI agents. No, it's going to cost $600 in random donations to people that you've targeted online based on their past behavior and likes and everything else. To go out there and just wreak havoc. It was like, you know, when I talked about the Serbs were, you know, they wanted me to produce this movie and the money came from this American dude who was living in Russia and had a Russian wife. And I remember when they were getting the money, Mishka was like, yes, his wife is total alcoholic. She disappeared for a week. We find her in a dumpster. And you're like, that's another way to control people. You're like, hey, take this drunk, really messed up person and let's hook him up. Hook her up with, you know, lonely dude.
We just had
all kinds of ways to influence a situation.
We just had 84 seconds of pure aural bliss for people in this fight, because we had Keir Giles on last week, who just wrote Russia's War on Everybody. And he broke down the person, the archetypes of the people who end up becoming Russian propagandists. And it's exactly what you just said. In fact, let's end with that clip again. Let's end this episode with that particular clip again. So we also learned from Keir that sometimes there doesn't even have to be a reason. It's just the chaos, destabilization. And in a report that I just did about a Department of Justice indictment against a Russian FSB cutout named Ionov, it was staggeringly cheap to pay ops on the left and ops on the right. Sometimes it was just a flight to go protest in front of Meta for not allowing anti-Ukraine bullshittery. And it was like, oh my God, we have completely, in some ways, overestimated, you know, or overthought some of this stuff. And I think your point is really important.
Well, it's easy and it's low tech. I don't know if I described this in American Psyop, but when my wife and I went down to Phoenix, you know, before I went and did that ceremony with Remy, that must have been like 2017, 2018. And we're, you know, having a smoke outside the hotel, and this, you know, woman is out there, and there had been some big party the night before. And she's like, yes, I'm Ukrainian. I'm from Las Vegas. I got flown down for the big party last night. And you're like, yeah, she slept with some politician.
Yeah.
Like, how cheap is that? Like, a few $100, and you own that person. And most of them probably don't even need to be blackmailed. They're just like, hey, if I hang out with this person and I go to these things, I'm going to get laid.
Two words, Project Veritas, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what this is. And guess who runs Project Veritas? Eric fucking Prince.
Yeah, I think we need to get to Standing Rock, because I was involved in the real resistance. It was infiltrated and probably set up from the beginning. I was involved in the Women's March. It was infiltrated. You know, every single thing that's good, in the words of Hemingway, anything that was ever any good you pay for. Standing Rock should have been something that was beautiful and celebrated. And in fact, it was either infiltrated or set up from the beginning. Can you give our viewers just a quick briefing on that so we can ask you a few questions about that?
I think it was infiltrated, not set up from the beginning. But I think once they had it there, the idea was that you could get people to go through, they get their, you know, street cred. And, you know, for me, they wanted me to become controlled opposition. I mean, what was missing on January 6, 2021 was controlled opposition who would have brought a couple hundred people or a couple thousand people outside the Capitol. So you could have had, you know, big fight and violence. And then the president would have tried to declare martial law. And as all these militia people were telling people, they were going to then round people up and kill them.
Well, thank you, Jim.
Who stopped the controlled opposition?
Thank you, Jim Stewartson, for tweeting to your tens of thousands of viewers or readers to stay home on January 6th because they were the marks. People
we went for mimetic warfare.
Speaking of infiltration, I set up a whole group for the purpose of telling the left not to go to January 6th. And that group then got deeply infiltrated, and that was one of the most traumatic things that happened to me. It was very there were a lot of bells that were rung, you know, that were similar to Standing Rock. It was and those things are not coincidental, right?
No, it's a lot of the same people using the same methods. I mean, as we lay out in the podcast, look, it's a loosely affiliated network of about 7 nation states with like the corrupt faction that was running it at the time, trying to push the United States over the edge in it.
Oh my God. These are the things that these are the things that Wes Jr. says that I'm just like, preach, brother, because we are here trying to break through the denial. And we just learned from our friend Keira Giles that until a leader of a Western nation stands up and says, we are the target of this type of warfare, we can't break through that denial on a mass level. So it's left to people like us and you to try to expose people to this so they realize it's not in our or their imagination.
It is, but, you know, on some level, we did this to ourselves starting out, because the spot that was there was distrust of information you're getting. So for the last, you know, 25 or 30 years, everything you've seen on national news media has been massaged through PR people. PR people place the stories. PR people pick the reporters. And the reporters themselves, because everybody cut the staff at their newsrooms and reporting is expensive, it's a lot cheaper to read, hey, I got this press release from whatever organization, and you know, this PR person who I'm friends with, and they took me out to dinner once. They want me to interview them. So you had this kind of lie thing going on, and I will say this was a both party thing.
Yes,
20 or 30 years, which is using PR techniques to try and skirt the truth on issues, and that opens up this huge blind spot in society where people are like, well, I don't trust what I'm seeing, because look, people know a lot of times when something's false. Like you get a gut feeling on it.
Oh yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. High five.
Gut feeling. Thank you for bringing that up. There was a moment in American Psyop where these agents tried to get you to touch a fake IED.
Yeah.
How would you describe what went on in your brain where you're like, this is bullshit? What happened in your mind?
In my mind, I thought, I don't know who any of these people are. In my mind, I thought, this guy's carrying around what he thinks is an IED for like 5 days, like in his backpack. What kind of lunatic would do that? And just the very thing of showing it to me and it looking really fake, but then being like, the dude's holding it out there for me to like touch. I'm like, dude, I'm not touching that.
Yeah.
Because
Keep your hands in your pockets.
Yeah. I mean, stuff was weird at that point. Like I totally knew stuff was completely weird at that point.
Oh my God.
You got to resist it, but you'll get a gut feeling when something's off. Like right before you get mugged, right before something else, you're gonna be like, this doesn't feel right, because your brain is subconsciously. I mean, look, your brain does data analysis, and it's picking up data points that your conscious mind isn't aware of, which is why you get stuff in the gut.
Yes, exactly. I want to jump in for a second, gentlemen. Jason Van Tatenhove, who's been a guest on our show and who testified in front of the January 6th committee. He was a propagandist for the Oath Keepers, who then, 5 years ago saw what was really going on and tapped out. But he said two really important things. One, that he got drawn into that world because he said he had what he called a healthy distrust of government. So that was his entry point. He's also a writer, thought he could write his Hunter S. Thompson, Hell's Angel type thing. So, but it's exactly what you just said. That healthy distrust of government was his gateway drug into the Oath Keepers. Secondly, he described how Stewart Rhodes would find these outrage stories, so Stewart could insert himself into it, show up at these rancher standoffs, set up the tents, make the big show for the media, the dust storms, everything, and then take the guys back to a casino where they'd really sleep. And Stewart Rhodes' son said that, that his father was working directly for Mike Flynn and Eric Prince. So when I heard that, I thought, gee, I remember in American Psyop, Wes Jr. saying when they were at Standing Rock, they'd make a big show of the tents and then everybody would go back to the casino. It freaked me out. I don't believe in coincidences.
I think the stranger coincidence of it was that both Stewart Rhodes and I had a Serbian national with us when we came up with our plans. Yeah, and not a Serbian American, a Serbian national out of a country of 6 million people, one for the right, one for the left.
Wow.
I mean, it's important. It's important, to a large extent, the superpower that Serbia has is invisibility. Because as soon as you mention the Balkans, people's eyes glaze over and they can't follow it. But a lot of what's going on in the modern world, politically, struggles, everything like that, it's all tied to the collapse of the former Yugoslavia in terms of the propaganda, who's pushing it, the ideas put forward. I mean, look, I don't think it's a coincidence that Tiffany Trump vacationed in Belgrade in August of 2020.
I'm sure it's beautiful that time of year.
Well, listen, I've lived in the Balkans, and I can tell you, if you were like the poorest villager in Serbia, you would not spend your summer vacation in Belgrade. Because there's nothing. It's a hot, dirty city, man. In August, all the Serbs take off. I mean, what was she doing there?
Yeah.
And I think we probably know what she was doing there. Mm-hmm. Serbian agents don't bring as much attention as Russian agents in the United States.
That just, again, preach, brother. High five.
But it's the same people with the same ideas, the same genocidal ideas, the same religious chauvinism. It's the reason all these guys on the super right who do this stuff look like a bunch of Chetniks.
And I would argue that they use the same
propaganda for 30 years.
Whoa.
They use the same playbooks too, because if you look at January 6th and you look at Brazil, how is that not what?
Hold on a second. Religious chauvinism. Let's just let that kind of float into the universe. I'm going to be playing around with that. That's genius. Oh my God.
But that's what it is. It was trying to target people to be like, well, the Muslims are coming to kill all of us, as they're killing all the Muslims. And it was done, in the former Yugoslavia, it was done by the fans of soccer teams who organized militias and then went in and set up rape camps and you know, concentration camps and murdered people.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, the owner of one of those big soccer clubs or soccer teams, the one that Archon, who was a notorious war criminal there in the 90s, he owned Dan Tana's, which people outside of LA don't know what that is.
Well, no. You see my jaw drop. What?
That was like the big Hollywood steakhouse.
What? It still is.
Oh, I thought he'd sold the restaurant.
Oh, he may have, but I mean, like,
all these Serbs that got involved with me, you know, after 2010, they all would take me to Dan Tana's.
Yeah.
Hey, you come here for the best food. And it was like the hot place to be in the 90s and the aughts.
Yeah, no, the big slice of beef would be the only thing on the plate, you know? Oh my God. Hi-Fi, you said something.
So I have family in Slovenia. As a matter of fact, one of my second cousins actually served in parliament there. Yeah, Tito's death. I mean, Tito was a dictator. He was an authoritarian. But his death really caused that whole area of the world to fall apart. And that makes me very sad.
And I don't think anybody there would look back on it. I mean, I guess the super nationalists would and go, hey, things are better now than they could have been if we didn't all try and kill each other. And when you're there, it's like, dude, you can only tell who people are if you're super local and identify the last names. I mean, everybody looks the same. They speak with the same accent. They, you know, everyone's got a refrigerator, a 2-car garage, and they all murdered each other.
Wow.
Here's a question I have.
Wow.
Because this relates directly to what happened to me over the last few years. Is you mentioned this guy Josh from Anonymous.
Who knows if he was from Anonymous? He said he was from Anonymous.
Well, what's interesting is I have multiple people who were involved in operations against me who also claimed to be anonymous. As a matter of fact, are actually documented news stories about them. Yes, they're the founder of Anonymous, blah, 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 all these things. It seems to me, you know, if you know the history of the H.B. Gary and the Stratfor hacks, if you know about Peter Thiel's Palantir going after Assange and going after all of that, it seems to me that the name Anonymous has been completely and utterly tarnished. And if people continue to use that as an excuse for whatever they're doing, would you be wary if someone came up to you and said, hey, I'm part of Anonymous, let's go do something?
Dude, I'd be wary literally of anybody coming up to me and saying anything.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, Anonymous
really?
Anonymous was infiltrated. I mean, speaking of which, right? It was and this is my opinion, but I know all about it. Is Anonymous was largely sincere, you know, until that event happened, until Anonymous exposed Peter Thiel, and then it got infiltrated like very deeply. And the reason why its name was tarnished is because our adversaries did the same thing to Anonymous as they do to everything else.
Everything else. It's a playbook
that is effective in America. So I just wanted to say it's like that's a good example, I think, of the same thing.
And let's also think about when it comes to adversaries. Yes, Russia is a huge part of it, but it's not just Russia. I mean,
of course,
it's empowered by, you know, Netanyahu, by the Saudis,
MBS,
by UAE, China. I mean, everybody was like, "Hey, let's get rid of democracy. Let's get somebody who we can do business with."
What I found very interesting in mentioning Netanyahu is that what's the first thing he did when, you know, he was rejected a couple of years ago? He called Putin and said he'd be back. Look who's back. Look who's already like broing down, the two of them.
Yeah, so. Look who also has 80,000 Israelis protesting against the changes that he's. I mean, I think, and this is just me here. I think what we're going to see in Israel is the same thing we saw in Ukraine when Yanukovych was in power. I hope not, for the Israelis' sake. I hope, you know, hundreds of people don't have to die to remove him from power. But
well,
I have no idea what'll happen anywhere. I mean,
there is
forces against democracy and for corruption will continue. I mean, they not only will infiltrate groups, they'll infiltrate groups that have no political anything. Like, hey, is there a worldwide club for left-handers that meets once a year in like Dubai? Yes. Okay, let's send some people there.
But that is so important because that's the denial we're trying to break through. What I am trying to do, because I worked all last year on the local level, all that shit's right there on the local level that we are seeing on the national level, and it's a disease that spread throughout the country. That there has been a unwillingness, thanks to sort of the corporate media kind of putting up a barricade against, you know, making all these connections, which is why I'm very grateful to be a part of an independent investigative team that removes those barriers and says, let's focus on the truth in a time of mass deception. So, and that's also what we try to do on this show here. I would love very much in the time that we have left for you to just sort of help our viewers understand that there are, like Jim said earlier, there are no rear areas in this type of information warfare. And if there's anything that you can do to sort of share a bit about the trauma, but also how you managed to sort of heal and begin the process of healing and coming back to the goodness that is the world, the self-care that you do with your animals and gardening and things like that, because I think people need those things in this time.
No, you gotta just engage with the real world. You got to get to know your neighbors. You got to be outside. You got to get some sunlight. You know, you got to a certain extent, shut off the thing that is whispering in your ear all the bad stuff. And, you know, look, when we think about how will we get beyond this, you know, a lot of the problem is people project their own ideas onto the world. So to a large extent, you've got this really nefarious, nasty group of people on the right wing, like around Roger Stone and that kind of whole group, who assume the other side is doing stuff just like them. And that's what they're putting in people's heads. And it's making it really hard to have functioning democracy if everybody has like a second agenda or a quote real agenda that they're pushing. And frankly, I think one of the best ways for the country to get through something like this is to have something like a Truth and Reconciliation Committee where people can come out and explain and talk about these things. Because look, to a large extent, many of your representatives, and I'm sure media people and other stuff, have been compromised. And if you look at it, I'm sure most of it's over ridiculous stuff. You know, you think, man, our democracy could be on the brink because some guy got a hand job at a conference and he's worried about it. Or
true.
They didn't cover the camera on their computer when they were spanking it to porn, and now they're being told everybody's going to see what you do if you don't vote yes on this.
Yeah.
But most people probably don't need their arms twisted. Mm-hmm. Most people are just like, hey, I'm getting paid. I've got a health insurance. I get to go on TV. There's, you know, pretty women around me. I mean, they don't think that there's anything wrong with it. They don't think they're being blackmailed or pushed in a certain way. They just like hanging out with certain people.
Wow.
They don't see the fact that they're leading us down to the path to World War III and the deaths of billions of people is, I think, the problem.
I just wrote a piece about a double agent for the CIA called Aldrich Ames. Aldrich Ames. And he just kind of shrugged from behind bars. He's still in prison. He ratted out almost 30 Russian agents who were working for America. 10 of them were executed. One committed suicide. Another one escaped. But from behind bars, he's just like, yeah, it was just folly and greed. You know, he got paid $2.7 million, just folly and greed. He knew that these men more than likely were going to get tortured and executed, but he got paid. So
well, it's you have to look at, what is the percentage of people in the general population who are sociopaths or psychopaths?
Exactly.
And then how can they be identified online based on data? How can you target them to get them to do what you want? I mean, it may not be a big deal if it's only 3 or 4% of the population pre-internet, because if 1 in 30 people's, it's not a technical term, but if 1 in 30 people is an asshole, they're not really going to be able to do much in the real world, because the other 29 people are like, dude, this guy's a total asshole.
Right.
Like, why are we listening to him? But online, of course, everybody has more reach and scale, and you can shift what people understand about the world. And most people are so, I've gotten contacted by a bunch of right-wingers through this thing who are like, it's Hollywood control. And yeah, there's a lot of intel agencies and mobsters in Hollywood, but nobody approves a script where they're like, this says the exact 3 code words we're going to need people to know in 8 years when we pull it. Like, that's just not how screenwriting works. It's not how movies work. And so a lot of it is people's brains have been warped by entertainment for the last 30 years, but it's not a conspiracy any more than, male attendance at college or grades has gone down because of video games. It's not like, the National Organization of Women sat down in 1971 and they're like, how can we even the playing field? Put money in Atari. Like that's not how it works. A lot of times we see something as a conspiracy just because it's how stuff goes. It's how stuff happens. I mean, it's like money is like gravity. So the more money you have, the more money you're going to make. It's not a conspiracy. It's just the way some systems work. And you have to, in your brain, kind of figure out what those are. And it's made difficult because, look, I'm a guy, I play video games. Pretty much every video game since mid-90s that had a story, and you're going through the game and you're doing what you're supposed to do. The last act of the video game is your boss you've been working for is really lying to you, and you're doing stuff for the bad guys. And every movie does that. It's like Philip Dick was the most kind of 21st century writer we had, because he blurred that line of reality. But because his short stories have been such great and popular movies, everybody tries to reproduce that mind fuck. And once in a while, a mind fuck is great. But when you're constantly being mind fucked, you start to lose grasp of reality.
Can I just point out that Philip K. Dick, I absolutely love his work. I read a ton of it as a kid. He was also severely mentally ill. And I don't think people know that.
Well, what I want to say is that as somebody who does suffer post-traumatic news syndrome, has not had cable TV or a television in my home since 2006. So I'm going on 17 years, I guess, without that, even though I produced it during that time. What I learned is that if it bleeds, it leads, which means that the money was made in telling the horror stories, right? But what happened along the way is that it's metastasized. So let's say 30 years ago, 2% of the population were sociopaths. As Jim says, they're now sorting them to the top, and maybe they already did. But when you have a battlefield like the human brain, and you have a platform like Twitter run by one of them, the reach and the scale of it is something that we haven't seen before. We talked earlier about the pamphlets, well, now it's like, cranked up to 11. So I just think that point is really incredibly valuable.
Oh, for sure. No, I when I was in the Army, now I just, I spent about, a lot of my life. I lived in Colorado Springs 3 times growing up and when I was in the Army. It's like one of the most conservative cities in America. And I was there when I was still in the Army in 95, I was dating this reporter from the local ABC affiliate. And she was doing a story on Amendment 2 in Colorado, which, if folks probably aren't familiar with, that was the first anti-gay measure in the country. And she got fired from the station because the guy who came up with it, Perkins, owned Perkins Chrysler Plymouth, and they were the big, you know, ad people
I can relate.
the station. Now she got fired, and you know, she broke a story that, hey, our big advertiser is pushing this like anti-gay measure. But when she looked back at her career in local news, the most popular story was cat shot by arrow. And it was popular because they had the video of the cat alive with the arrow through it at the vet.
God,
So
does that ring bells?
People's understanding of what's happening in their local community, which is really your local politics determines your life way more than the national government.
Right.
And yet nobody knows what's going on in local politics. I mean, look at this clown from New York, Santos. I mean, like, there wasn't a single reporter who's like, dude, something is off about this.
There was, but it was papered over by all of the other shit. And again, when Facebook accounts become your news service run by a Philippine troll farm, which happens and it's documented, it happened in Stockton, it helped take out a mayor in Stockton, then that is, you know, that is how deep this these journalism deserts, you know, have damaged our country.
I mean, you know, when we grew up, there were several newspapers for any town that had over like 300,000 or 400,000 people. Now there's like, you know, there's a little post on Facebook that comes out once a week that someone does for free. And it's an inability for people to recognize, okay, on your whole chain to becoming a politician and how you deal with problems, where are these people farmed from? Well, you start out at the local level. So you are running for mayor or Congress or something else. What are you? You're either somebody who enables your local real estate developer to make more money, because that's the most important thing at a local level in terms of tax revenue and everything else, or you're working for the DA, just racking up the numbers of putting people in jail. You know, and many things aren't necessarily conspiracies. They're like, you know, as income inequality changes and workers' benefits and everything go down, it's not that there's one person who's like, we're going to do this. I mean, those people are out there, but a lot of it is how people, like, let me give you an example. In the Army, you have what's called an officer efficiency report. And it's your report every year that's like, you know, it's your report card. And you have to come up with your own counseling statement like a year before where you lay out your goals. And of course, this was all replicated in the corporate world during the 90s in, you know, how you manage people and how you get the most out of folks. But what happens is, let's say your workers were getting paid, you know, pensions and everything else was eating up 23% of your corporate budget in 2002. And you just replaced the guy before you. And you're like, under me, it's only going to be worth 21%. And so each person in the new executive job comes up with a list of things where for their resume, for their next job, they can be like, yeah, I cut costs by 20%. Like, they don't tell you, like, yeah, a lot of our people's teeth are falling out now because we don't offer dental care. I mean, so some things are conspiracies and some things are just the way systems are and the type of people who are going to be attracted to that kind of job, and that they really don't care about their fellow people they work with, because executives come and go at companies. Most of them are not promoted from within.
So sociopathy is a superpower, and with it comes shamelessness, right? Which is, for me, one of the biggest weapons of people, you know, on the wrong side is they're not ashamed of doing horrendous shit to other people. And the people, you know, other people who have empathy, who care about other human beings, have a huge disadvantage because we don't have all these options, right?
Yeah.
We don't have internally the option of taking people's health insurance away because we know that that's going to hurt people. But if you don't give a fuck, you know, and you're not ashamed of not giving a fuck, then it, you know, you have a big advantage.
For sure. You're going to go far. And most people, you know, it comes from different traumas when they were growing up and they feel like they're never good enough. But, you know, then you look at a guy like Elon Musk, like, who for a while was the richest guy in the world, and no amount of money is going to fix the empty hole in that guy's life.
Nope.
Yes.
That dude didn't even feel shame when he had to pay $250,000 in a pony for a hand job.
Okay, so listen,
Like,
that's not where we're going to end it. Okay, we're not going to end it there.
actually, I do have one more question too.
I do just wanted to dovetail off of what Jim was just saying. Somebody tweeted out another, I realized that Santos was theater craft. He would be our next distraction. I figured out very quickly he took money from Victor Vexelberg through a cutout. Like, it's all the same crap.
Yeah, it's the same people funding.
Yeah, it's the same everything. But one thing, like somebody had tweeted out, oh, look at this. A woman 10 years ago said that she flew to the States with Santos, and he, robbed her and emptied her bank account and took all her jewelry. And I said, that's why he'll probably be the presidential GOP nominee. So that's where Trump has taken
country. So
it was cheeky. It was cheeky. There's that laugh. It was cheeky, but my point was, and it's something that Ruth has taught me, and Jim, of course, and Hi-Fi, when you have somebody who comes in trying to hide their corruption, the only I can fix it guy who comes in broke but pretends to be some, genius businessman, and that person will reward those who also are there to hide their corruption and to do their bidding, and that's what happens. Hi-Fi, take us out.
So my final question for you is, you had people from the I Am cult messing with your head. You had people from Eric Prince's groups messing with you, setting you up. What would you say, not to the people who ran the ops, but the people behind that, the people who pay for these operations, the people who cause this chaos, the big money, the billionaires? What would you say to them today?
I would say that you're putting your own future in danger. And I don't mean that in the sense of, Johnny Law is going to come and arrest you. It's you're putting your life in danger the same way the existence of billionaires and massive income inequality puts people in danger. You're putting people in danger by dismantling and destroying groups that are going to do something about climate change. Like, nobody is an island, and the worse things get, like, I'm a believer that things evolve over time, whether it's music, politics, anything else. And what these people are doing is they're trying to freeze this moment in time so that those who have the most power and the most money will continue having the most power and the most money. It's rent seeking. But the problem is, if you don't change, pressure builds up and eventually it explodes. So that's to me, it's the basics of why you want a democratic system, is that it's a pressure valve for injustices that happen in society. And if you destroy people that point out the injustice and you destroy people that try and fix it, you're eventually left with a grotesque, unjust society where eventually it just explodes. And by the way, and the wealthiest people will not come out of this well. I mean, go fast forward through climate change and you'd be like, stick a couple billionaires in a bunker with, like, I don't know, 100 years of food and water. Like,
no, that's okay, Wes. We're gonna be on Mars.
But they won't even last like months.
Mars is the answer.
Seriously, like it takes people.
That's what these people think.
Yeah.
Well, so what you just said was incredibly brilliant, and it goes back to what Jason Stanley said, that fascism isn't good for anybody, and it's not good for any of these guys.
It's not even good for the fascists. Look, the #1 killer of neo-Nazis in America is other neo-Nazis.
There's our interview. Wes.
I have one final thing. So about 20 months ago, I took a vow to destroy some billionaires, put them in cages where I can. Elon Musk is now in the Guinness Book of World Records for having lost the most money of every human ever. How am I doing?
Oh, in destroying them?
Yeah.
Well,
am I doing all right?
Look,
should I turn it up more? I don't know.
I think you know, you've done good stuff if you're responsible for all that. But part of it is people's own worst enemy, and, you know, I'm included in this, we're all included in this, is always themselves.
Yeah.
So it's like, and I'm sure it's not an Irish saying, but my mom's Irish Catholic, so they tend to think like everything.
It's
like
fully Irish.
But she's like, the higher you climb on the pole, the more you expose your ass. Like, it's just the higher up people get, the more ridiculous they become, because they're surrounded by other people who need healthcare. They need their rent paid. They need stuff. And they know if they say the wrong thing to this person, they'll be fired. So you're surrounded by nonsense. You know, a lot of them get bad advice. I mean, in addition to being sociopaths.
Well, they put people around them who say the things that they want to hear.
Yeah. Because,
I mean, they create their own reality, just like they try and create realities for other people. I just, Wes, I want to say thank you again. The courage it took to do that is not only healing for the rest of us who've, you know, felt this before, but I think gives other people and will give other people the permission to tell their stories. And I think there's no more important thing that anyone could do. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. This has been done to thousands of people. You know, they're not all done in the same way it was done to me, but not only of people of influence or that could have influence, but just random people as they're practicing it, who had nothing to do with anything. It's a more widespread phenomenon than people think.
Well,
absolutely.
There are no rare areas, which was actually a quote from Gerasimov, which we just learned. Wes, thank you so much for coming on this show. And
my pleasure.
Once upon a time, and hopefully in the future again, I was a director, and you are a natural actor. So I do hope you pursue some of that.
I've learned never to do anything in the arts. It's really subjective. And I'm not out sleeping with a bunch of people. And frankly, and a lot of people's connections are sexual connections that they keep through life. It's not like an organized thing. It's just people are like, no, I want this person involved because I get laid when I'm around them. And I mean, as a...
You're trying to lure me to Hollywood, man? What's going on?
It's not like anyone's going to be like, I need some of that. Like, it's just not how it works.
I'm the one with the ridiculous laugh at this point. Oh my God. There it is. Oh, that we couldn't have asked for a better ending. Wes, thank you so very much.
Oh, my pleasure. I hope you all have a good day.
We do hope you come back, and we hope you have a beautiful day too. And we hope you stay well and your family stays well.
Thank you.
Let's save the world, man.
Too. Take care.
OMG. Wow. Well, I think the perfect way to cap that episode is to bring back the perfect 84 seconds from Keir Giles, our previous guest, who explains the chief characteristics of those who are the most virulent Russian propagandists.
The pattern, unfortunately, that seems to underlie a lot of the most enthusiastic Russian propagandists is that they have been dealing with severely damaged personalities and personal failure for most of their lives. In fact, the overlap between the number of Russian propagandists who also turn out to be convicted sex offenders is absolutely startling. There are some deep-seated fundamental personality flaws that actually predispose people to being available to be made use of by Russia. And if you look back at the KGB handbooks for recruiting agents of influence, agents of subversion, or indeed propagandists, then you can see very clearly that Russia understood the misfits make the good targets, the people with a grudge, the people who feel they've been treated unfairly by the world because they've been consistent failures, and therefore seek revenge. And you can see that revenge coming through so strongly in some of the verbal attacks that you hear from the trolls, from the so-called independent journalists, the ones pushing the Russian propaganda lines, because the bile and the vitriol and the hatred that they pour out when they're talking about people who criticize Russia, it's extremely personal, and it's plainly tapping deeply into their own personality defects.
when you're completely surrounded by everybody thinking the same thing, you think, okay, I'm just going to play along. Their end goal is something good, which is, dude, we have to do something about climate change.
Did this crew of people also speak to your wife?
Yeah, they all had come over to the house, and my wife is like, who the fuck are all these people suddenly all around us? But for me, it felt fun. It felt like I'm doing something good that's righteous and just. You know, if someone comes over and they tell you you're bound for a very special mission, you have a very powerful spirit inside of you, and you hear these things, and then later a different person brings up these same ideas to reinforce the belief in you. And I was like, give me more of that crazy. That crazy's good. They were all trying to push me in this really specific path of UFOs, Saint Germain, theosophy. So all these people start reaching out to me, and I mean from every nook and cranny of reality you can think of.